Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Sunday Business on NBR Radio. Each week we bring you the very best of the business week, including news, views and interviews with those making the headlines and those hoping to do so in the future. My featured guest is Shay Wright, co-founder of Te Whare Hukahuka, who earlier this month was named by Forbes magazine as one of its 30 under 30 leading social entrepreneurs in the Asia-Pacific region. Despite being just 26, Shay is already making his mark in business as a social entrepreneur. As a young Maori with a passion to enable the organisations he works with to be world-class, he's someone who's driven by his sense of conviction, his culture and his belief that actions speak louder than words. Growing up in a humble Maori community in the far north, he noticed how local iwi did not receive tailored or fit-for-purpose training and support to grow their community enterprises. This led him to work with business growth hub the Ice House to set up a dedicated unit to grow indigenous organisations. From this, Te Whare Hukahuka was born, a fast-growing education and leadership enterprise that creates cutting-edge learning experiences. Te Whare Hukahuka now have trained hundreds of indigenous Maori leaders who between them collectively serve more than 200,000 iwi members. The focus is on building confident strategic thinking and governance skills and providing tools, resources and networks to enable leaders to realise their aspirations and find truly sustainable ways to achieve the goals for their community. And Shay joins me now. Kia ora, Shay.
Kia ora, Andrew.
As I mentioned in that intro, you grew up in the far north in Kaitaia. What struck you most from an early age about growing up in a community that had its fair share of poverty and social challenges?
One thing that struck me was the lack of success stories being normal in our community and the need to look at how we made that more of the norm. And so I kind of set about going, well, I want to contribute success stories and be part of creating them so that our young people and our local people in the far north and rural communities right around the country can actually feel pride in themselves and can feel part of something bigger than themselves and look at how they might take opportunities and feel that they can be part of doing that.
Maori culture sometimes has a tension with success. That famous Maori proverb, the kumara never speaks of its own sweetness. Is that a real tension? Is that an issue?
Yeah, I think it is a real tension. It does hold a lot of individuals back from promoting themselves. I mean, we have a very humble culture here in New Zealand, a culture of humility, which is definitely not a bad thing. However, when we think about putting ourselves forward for opportunities and when we think about going up against those who might be far more self-promoting, we're competing against that. And so I think that there is a tension there. It can be a healthy tension, and generationally we're getting far more used to telling our stories. And if we think even about what we do at Te Whare Hukahuka, we don't do it in a way that is self-promoting. The success stories that we tell are about the clients that we work with, are about the communities that we work in. Yes, we've played a role in that, and yes, we're very proud about the role we play in that, but it doesn't need to come from a place of just espousing our own success and talking about ourselves.
You were head boy at Kaitaia College. Did you have leadership aspirations from a young age?
I think one thing that set me apart, Andrew, from a lot of my peers was that I've had leadership aspirations from a very young age and have been very disciplined in making sure that I did the work and the required work, working smart, not just hard, to actually further those.
Do you feel that your generation, like all millennials, are empowered to change?
I think that there's a huge opportunity for millennials to make a change. And there's a whole lot of technological advancements, tools, systems, and then just general support that exists to help people, young people particularly, be part of making change. And we're seeing some amazing examples of how young people are doing that. And the Forbes 30 under 30 list is a great example of that, profiling young people who went, you know what, I don't want to just be sitting on the sidelines watching something or even joining a movement. I actually want to champion something and do it from a place of what I can contribute as a young person to make society a better place to live.
So after your studies at Auckland University, you take up a position at the Ice House to develop Maori entrepreneurship. What was your goal at the time, and how did you go about identifying how best to allocate what I imagine were very limited resources?
Yeah, so our goal for the Maori unit of the Ice House was to provide some tailored support to the Maori organisations that would otherwise not being served. And Icehouse is amazing at what it does and around supporting entrepreneurs to grow businesses, whether that be in startups or whether that be multi-million-dollar enterprises. What we realised was to have that same level of success at growing the aspirations, the confidence, the belief, as well as the skills of Maori leaders, we were going to need a slightly more tailored program. We would need to remove some of the jargon. We'd need to frame it more in a community context as opposed to a business context. And so that was what we set about doing over the 4 years that we were working with the Icehouse.
What did you identify as the problem you were seeking to solve?
We did a lot of market validation, to use a business term, around what problems we should be solving. We had some ideas around what those should be, but working on the ground with 500 Maori leaders has been really good testing ground to identify actually what are the common problems that come up, and then what are the few things that we could help teach to actually address those problems. And so where we thought business capability and financial capability was likely to be some of the main problems that existed, actually there were a whole lot of other interesting problems and dynamics that we identified around strategy and making sure that strategies were clear and high level as well as drop down to operational level, around tensions between individuals and how you work together as a group on a board, and also around aspiration and opening minds to other possibilities in different aspects of the value chain or in different industries or in different ways to improve the lives of the community members that those Māori organisations are serving.
One of the things that's always interested me is that if you look at Māori entrepreneurship pre the treaty, it was extensive. Why do you think Māori lost that spirit of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I mean, Māori were the first traders internationally from New Zealand. They used their land to grow wheat and they built their own flour mills and then they owned their own ships and traded. So entrepreneurialism and the pursuit of innovation, and even in the pursuit of moving through the Pacific and circumnavigating half of the world before any other culture had even, it's built into our culture. I actually think that the reason that entrepreneurialism became less prominent in Māori communities, and the same reason why we see rising levels of poverty and social deprivation and inequality in Māori communities, is because of an intergenerational and systematic deconstruction of the Māori economy.
And that, in turn, has led us to the position that we now find ourselves. So one of the things that interested me too, that if we think of the process of iwi settlements, and if we give ourselves another 20 or 30 years, by about 2040, Māori entrepreneurship could be back to where it was in 1840. It's taken 200 years to get back to where it was. Is that your vision?
Well, look, I absolutely think it's possible, and I think it's a very exciting proposition, because what we see is Māori organisations care fundamentally about the social, the cultural, and the environmental prosperity of their community.
So this is guardianship.
This is guardianship. And that, I think, is a very different premise to what, say, Western capitalist models look to prioritise as the most important things.
So you have this ability to cross-influence philosophies across the Pākehā business world and the Māori business world. I mean, do you see them as separate and different, or do we need to think of them more as one?
I see that the learnings that we have from mainstream businesses, from very innovative, cutting-edge businesses, are absolutely relevant for Māori in certain areas. There are some great principles that we learn. I mean, we're big fans of teaching things like Jim Collins' work, Good to Great, because regardless of the context of your business or what's most important to you as an organisation, you're playing in a commercial world. And so what we tend to do is take some of those learnings and share those, but we retain very strongly the Māori kaupapa or the Māori ethos around centering the business around a social, cultural and environmental proposition.
Now, you've focused the business around a social enterprise model. How does that impact on the way you operate?
Similarly, Te Whare Hukahuka operates in this Māori paradigm, which is that the most important thing for us is to impact the lives of 10 million indigenous people. That's our end game. And so the ability to actually improve the lives of indigenous communities, whether that be Maori or overseas. That sits at the heart of what's important, and then what we've done is built a business model around our activity to enable us to actually reach that goal, which means that we do things which mainstream businesses may not do in terms of the types of people that we employ, in terms of the types of investment that we put back into developing certain types of platforms, in terms of the amount of time that we just give pro bono to furthering the cause of actually growing Māori organisations. So we don't have a purely commercial outlook, and therefore the actions that occur in our business reflect something that may be different to mainstream business.
So what's the broad approach of the model that you focus on? Because you're dealing with such an expansive range of issues you could focus on, and there's so much to do in that space. How do you really narrow it down to define what it is you want to do, and also how do you measure your success?
Yeah, we're huge fans of the idea that a few things make the greatest difference, Parecio's principle. Although in saying that, it's really hard to focus. One thing that myself and co-founder Travis O'Keefe are weak in is our ability to be disciplined. So we're very innovative and we're ideas people. What we've identified as a challenge is actually the ability to continuously take those ideas, those innovations, those new ways of doing things, and put a disciplined execution plan behind it to make sure that every day and every week we're doing our 200 metres towards our goal. And so where we've focused has been based on market validation around what are the key problems we need to solve within Māori organisations, as well as what sectors can we play in, as well as what types of Māori organisations can we work best with, as well as what kinds of delivery mechanisms can we have. So we do attempt to be as focused as we can. And we're still identifying the best ways that we measure our impact, interestingly enough. We just had a conversation last night around Jim Collins' idea of an economic engine KPI, that you should be able to bring your whole business back to measuring one KPI consistently, and that drives the economic engine. So we're identifying what that is, and we're still testing that, but we're wanting to make sure that we also have either a separate and strong measure of social progress in terms of the impact we want to create, or that our economic engine KPI is not inconsistent with our mission to improve the lives of Indigenous people around the world.
So do you see yourself as a kind of a McKinsey for the Maori economy?
To a certain degree, actually. I think we focus far more on creating learning experiences. What we really care about is self-empowerment of Indigenous people, to put the power back in the hands of those communities so that they can grow their own local economy. And so in that regard, we're about creating training programs and coaching programs. One challenge that we've seen with some of the other ways that Māori are accessing advice from other businesses is that it's not retained inside that community. So as soon as the advisor walks out of the room, so does all of the knowledge and the understanding. And I think what we're trying to do is change that paradigm so that the knowledge very much remains in the room inside that community.
What about the ability for iwi to cross-pollinate knowledge? Because obviously in the role that you're working in, you can be a connector between iwis. How much of that knowledge sharing is actually going on at the moment?
What we've identified from having worked with about 85 Māori organisations, 25 of which have been iwi, is that there's not a high level, great amount of that knowledge sharing in play.
Because iwis tend to be very competitive, don't they?
I think competitive is one way to look at it, but I think it's more around dynamics, personal dynamics, interpersonal dynamic. And I think that the treaty settlement process has not done a hell of a lot to help Māori collectivise and to stimulate collaboration between iwi. Essentially, it's been a process where we've pitched iwi against iwi to fight over a small pool of money. The hangover of that is a particular kind of mindset that Māori leaders may unfortunately fall victim to. The great opportunity is that we've got a generation of young Māori coming up who are not necessarily dogged or held down by that kind of mindset, who whakapapa or have connection to multiple different iwi because of their grandparents and parents. And so there is a far greater willingness to learn from each other. And we're in a privileged position where we're crossing so many different iwi that we see ourselves as those knowledge carriers to help begin to build bridges. And we're seeing great examples of where that's proving quite successful.
What about the fact that you're only 26, and we know that Maori traditionally are quite hierarchical? The oldest members of the iwi or the community have the greatest influence. How do you find working with people obviously a lot older than you and having to have some degree of influence over those discussions?
Well, I represent the 50% of the Māori population that's under the age of 25. And what's interesting is, while there will be some of our alumni who see us as young upstarts, we are very well received from even older Māori, and I think the reason is it's because we represent the future. We represent fresh thinking and new insights, and we bridge two worlds. We bridge the Māori cultural world, and we bridge this mainstream, fast-paced business world. And I think that reflects and represents something that a lot of Māori see as quite exciting about how we can ensure our culture thrives and survives in this modern context and moving into a very different looking world.
Do you feel like you're living the dream at the moment?
It's very exciting what we do, but there is so much to be done.
So there's a sense of frustration about not being able to do it fast enough?
Yeah, there's a sense of urgency around making sure that iwi organisations are well prepared for settlement, about making sure that we're addressing some of the real social inequity situations that do exist right now in our communities, as well as the ability to actually mobilise a whole range of supporters including government, including philanthropy and charitable funders, including the existing business support ecosystem, including Māori organisation leaders, including partners, to actually come together for this cause and make a difference now. What we're doing in light of that is setting up the systems and processes to enable us to scale. Not just scale our message, but also to scale our impact.
Finally, what has this recognition from Forbes meant for you personally?
Well, I think that it's a great credibility stamp to acknowledge that what we're doing is unique, is different, is valued, and actually is relevant as any other type of social enterprise work going on throughout Asia to help grow communities. And it's interesting how sometimes we rely upon external badges of credibility before we look inside and go, you know what these guys are doing must be pretty cool.
Yeah, well, you talked about market validation. You want the external validation as well too sometimes, don't you?
We do, and it goes a long way, but I think that what we're trying to do is to create Māori success stories, and along the way we've sort of become one ourselves for a very short time. So that's been quite exciting to be part of sharing the message.
I'm Andrew Patterson. Thanks for joining us. And if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, it's AndrewP_NZ. I hope you can join me again next time.